There's a moment in every believer's journey when the heart whispers, I want more. I want to walk with God the way the great men and women of faith did. And the truth is, that desire isn't random. It's God's own voice inside you, nudging you toward a deeper, braver, stronger kind of faith. Hebrews 11 is the doorway to that life. This chapter isn't just a list of names. It's the heartbeat of what faith really looks like when it's lived, breathed, tested, broken, rebuilt, and strengthened by the hands of God Himself. Whenever your life feels shaken, Hebrews 11 reminds you, faith isn't about perfection. Faith is about direction. And when God is the one directing you, even small steps create miracles. Let's step into this chapter together. A quiet moment that changes everything. Imagine sitting alone late at night. The house is quiet. The world has finally stopped rushing. You open your Bible, flip to Hebrews 11, and read those first 5 words. Now faith is the substance. You pause. You breathe. Something inside you stirs. You think about the prayers you've whispered, the tears you've hidden, the moments when you pretended to be strong but felt like collapsing inside. And suddenly, these words feel personal, not ancient, not distant, not from someone else's story. They feel like they're talking to you. Faith is the substance, the evidence. You read it again because there's a strange comfort in it. It feels like God is saying, what you're believing for, I already see it, even when you can't. That's where everything begins. Faith is not a feeling, it's a decision. Most people think faith is about emotions. Feeling strong, feeling confident, feeling hopeful. But Hebrews 11 shows something entirely different. Faith is when Noah builds an ark even though he's never seen rain. Faith is when Abraham moves without knowing the destination. Faith is when Sarah laughs at the promise, but God fulfills it anyway. Faith is when Joseph believes in dreams even when he's in a prison cell. Faith has nothing to do with feeling ready. Faith begins when you take a step even while trembling. God never asked you to be fearless. He only asked you to trust Him enough to start. And Hebrews 11 gathers all these stories together to show you. Your weakness has never been a barrier to God. Your hesitation has never scared Him. Your tears have never annoyed Him. Your questions have never pushed Him away. Faith is not the absence of struggle. Faith is choosing God in the middle of it. The hall of faith, ordinary people, extraordinary God. We often read the names in this chapter like they were superheroes. But they weren't. They weren't perfect. They weren't fearless. They weren't always obedient. They were just like you. People who wanted to believe. People who tried. People who failed. People who stood up again because God wouldn't let them stay down. Look at the list. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab, David, Samuel. Not one of them lived an easy life. But they all walked with a God who never let their faith be wasted. And the stunning part? They didn't receive every promise in their lifetime, but they still believed. God took their trust and turned it into legacy. Abraham's silent night. Let's zoom in for a moment. Picture Abraham, an old man standing under a sky full of stars. God tells him, I will make your descendants as countless as these. And Abraham just stands there, old, tired, childless. No evidence in sight. But he looks at the stars again and decides to believe. Just like that. One quiet decision under the night sky became the beginning of a nation. Your faith may feel small right now, but what if God is writing something huge behind the scenes? What if your simple yes today becomes the miracle of tomorrow? That's how Hebrews 11 works. Small decisions, big God, limitless results. When faith feels heavy. Let's be honest. Faith doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels exhausting. Waiting, holding on, praying again, starting again, trusting again. You look at the problems and think, God, I don't know how long I can do this. And God whispers back, you don't walk alone. I carry what you cannot. Every person in Hebrews 11 had a moment when faith felt too heavy. when the long nights stretched, when the heart broke, when the promise looked impossible. But those moments weren't the end. They were the turning point. Faith grows strongest in the dark because that's where God's light becomes most visible. Your story is part of Hebrews 11. Now here's the part we often forget. Hebrews 11 isn't finished. It doesn't end with a conclusion. It ends with an invitation. Because your name was meant to continue this list. Your faith, your battles, your prayers, your midnight wrestling, your seasons of waiting, your choices to trust, your moments of surrender. All of it is building a chapter in heaven with your story written in God's handwriting. Just imagine that for a second. God sees every tear, every step, every moment you kept walking when you could have given up. That's faith. That's legacy. That's Hebrews 11 alive in your life. The faith that protects you. When you walk with God, faith becomes a shield. Not a shield that stops trouble from coming, but a shield that stops trouble from defeating you. Look at Moses. He faced rejection,
fear,
Pharaoh's wrath. But Hebrews 11 says, he endured, seeing him who is invisible. That's your key. Faith helps you see what your physical eyes cannot. You might see a closed door, but faith sees a new path. You might see delay, but faith sees preparation. You might see brokenness, but faith sees God rebuilding. You might see silence, but faith hears God working in secret. Faith doesn't change the storm. Faith changes you in the storm. Rahab, the unexpected hero. And then comes one of the most surprising names, Rahab, a woman with a past. A woman nobody respected. A woman society wrote off. Yet Hebrews 11 honors her.
Why?
Because one moment of courage changed her entire life. Rahab believed in the God she had never seen, and he rewrote her destiny completely. That's what faith does. You might feel unqualified. You might feel flawed. You might feel you've made too many mistakes. But faith says, God can start a new story with you right now. When God says, your faith matters. Sometimes you pray and wonder if anything is happening. You wait and nothing changes. You believe, but life keeps throwing storms your way. But Hebrews 11 whispers something powerful. God notices your faith, even when nobody else does. Your faith is not lost, not ignored, not wasted. Heaven keeps record of every moment you chose God over fear.
Think about that.
Every time you forgave when it was hard, every time you trusted when it made no sense, every time you praised through tears, every time you said, God, I still believe you. Heaven wrote it down. You don't see the full picture yet, but one day, God will turn your obedience into testimony. Your faith will inspire someone one day. Someone in the future will thank God for your story. Your child will look back and say, my mother trusted God even when everything was falling apart. Your family will say, he didn't give up. He kept praying. Someone you haven't even met yet will find strength because you kept walking. That's the quiet beauty of faith. It doesn't just change your life, it changes generations. Abraham never saw the millions who came from his faith. But we are living proof. Your obedience today will bless people you will never meet. The final push, don't stop now. Maybe you feel tired. Maybe you're close to giving up. Maybe you're thinking, God, I can't fight this anymore. But Hebrews 11 shows one thing again and again. Faith becomes powerful when you don't stop. When you keep going. When you take another step. When you refuse to let fear write your story. Remember this. You don't need perfect faith. You only need willing faith. God will handle the rest. A quiet prayer for you. Father, give this person the strength to keep walking. Give them the courage to trust again. Give them the patience to wait well. Give them the peace that only you can give. And write their name in the story of faith you are building even now. Amen. A faith that starts in silence. Most people expect God to show up with a loud voice, a burning bush, a bolt of lightning. But real faith usually begins quietly. A tug in the heart, a whisper you almost miss, a small desire to trust, even when nothing around you makes sense. That's how it was for Enoch. The Bible says something beautifully simple. Enoch walked with God. No thunder, no fire, no grand scene, just a walk, a daily relationship, step by step, day by day. Sometimes your faith won't feel dramatic. It will feel gentle, like a hand resting on your shoulder, reminding you you're not alone. And maybe that's what God is inviting you into right now, a walk. You don't need to see everything to trust. One of the biggest challenges we face is wanting clear answers. God, tell me what you're doing. Show me how this will work. Why this delay? Why this pain? But Hebrews 11 teaches something bold. Faith sees the invisible, not the details, not the map, not the timeline, just God. Imagine walking with someone through fog. You don't see everything around you, but you hold their hand because you trust the person. Faith is like that, holding God's hand even when the road ahead is blurry. Enoch didn't see everything. Noah didn't see rain. Abraham didn't see the land yet. Moses didn't see the promised land in his lifetime. But they walked anyway, and God walked with them. Noah, obedience that looks crazy until God moves. If there's anyone whose story shows the cost of faith, it's Noah. Think about it. God told him to build an ark. Not near the ocean, not near a river, not for a storm they could see, not for rain they understood. In fact, they had never even seen rain before. And yet Noah builds, hammer in hand, sweat rolling down, people watching him, mocking him, whispering behind his back. But Noah keeps building, not because he saw the storm, but because he trusted the one who warned him. That's the kind of faith that Hebrews 11 celebrates. And maybe you're in a season like Noah, doing something that doesn't make sense to the world, praying for someone who seems too far gone, working on a dream that feels slow, standing for your family even when they don't notice, believing for a breakthrough while others laugh. But listen carefully. Obedience looks foolish right up until the moment God proves you right. When the rain finally came, the ark didn't look crazy anymore. Your faith will be validated too. Just keep building. When trust feels like risk, faith will always carry a little bit of risk. If it didn't, it wouldn't be faith. Abraham leaving home without knowing where he was going. Sarah believing in motherhood long after the world said too late. Joseph holding on to a dream through betrayal and prison. People probably looked at them and thought, this is risky. This is unrealistic. This is impossible. But God looked at them and said, this is faith. Sometimes the biggest steps of faith are the quiet ones. Choosing patience, choosing kindness, choosing forgiveness, choosing hope. God isn't asking you to understand everything. He's asking you to trust him in the places that feel risky. Because faith isn't safe. But it's worth it. Sarah, when the heart has lost hope. One of the most human, relatable moments in Hebrews 11 is Sarah's story. She laughed. Not the joyful kind. A tired laugh. A this is too good to be true laugh. A God, you're too late laugh. We've all been there. When you pray and nothing happens. When your heart grows tired. When you stop expecting good news. When disappointment becomes familiar. But God didn't punish Sarah for laughing. He didn't walk away. He didn't say, you didn't believe enough. Instead, he fulfilled the promise anyway. Because God's faithfulness is not limited by your doubt. His promises are not controlled by your feelings. He is bigger than your tired seasons. Sarah laughed and still received. Maybe you feel like Sarah today. Worn out, discouraged, done hoping. But God hasn't changed his mind about the promise he spoke over your life. Faith means letting go of your timeline. One of the hardest truths in Hebrews 11 is this. Many of them didn't receive the full promise in their lifetime, yet they still believed. That doesn't mean God failed them. It means their story was bigger than their moment on earth. Some blessings begin with you, and continue with your children, and their children, and generations you'll never see. Abraham didn't see the millions God promised, but the world sees them today. God's timeline may stretch farther than your lifetime, but his promise never dies. When you feel forgotten, remember Joseph. Joseph's life is the perfect example of misunderstood faith. He had dreams, big ones, But the road to those dreams felt like betrayal. Thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, accused falsely, locked in prison, forgotten by people he helped. It seemed like every step was going backward, but God was moving him forward in a hidden way. Sometimes God works best in invisible places. The seasons where no one claps for you, no one sees your effort, no one knows your tears. Those are the seasons where faith grows roots. Joseph's story proves something important. God's delays are not denials. God's silence is not absence. God's waiting is preparation. And at the right moment, God lifted Joseph from prison to palace in a single day. Your story can turn that fast too, not because you're perfect, but because God is faithful. Moses, faith that chooses the hard road. Moses' story shows a different kind of faith, a faith that chooses difficulty instead of comfort. He could have lived as royalty. He had position, privilege, power. But Hebrews 11 says he chose to suffer with God's people rather than enjoy temporary pleasure. Real faith isn't always about asking, what feels good right now? It's often asking, what honors God in the long run? Moses gave up the palace to follow his purpose, and that one choice shaped history. Sometimes God asks you to walk away from something easy, to step into something meaningful, and that's not loss. That's faith. Rahab, proof that your past cannot stop your calling. If Hebrews 11 had a surprise twist, it would be Rahab, a woman with a broken reputation, a past people wouldn't forget, a life society didn't value. But God looked at her and saw courage. He saw potential. He saw someone who could trust him in a single moment that mattered. Rahab wasn't perfect. She wasn't religious. She wasn't respected. But she believed. And that single moment of faith not only saved her life, but placed her in the lineage of Jesus. Imagine that. A woman the world judged became part of God's greatest promise. If you think your past disqualifies you, Rahab's story is God's way of saying, I still choose you. Faith doesn't always win the way you expect. Toward the end of Hebrews 11, the tone shifts. We read about people who were tortured, imprisoned, mocked, killed, chased, homeless, not because God abandoned them, but because their faith carried a weight the world couldn't understand. Sometimes victory doesn't look like escape. Sometimes victory looks like endurance. Faith is not always about God pulling you out of the fire. Sometimes it's about God standing inside the fire with you. And when He stands with you, the flames lose their power. Your life is a chapter in heaven. Here's something breathtaking. Hebrews 11 ends without a final sentence. It doesn't close the list, doesn't put a period, doesn't wrap it up neatly.
Why?
Because the story continues with you. Every prayer you whisper, every step you take, every moment you keep believing, every time you choose God, heaven records it.
You are part of the story.
Your name belongs in this list of faith. You're not living an ordinary life. You are walking with an invisible God who sees everything and wastes nothing. A gentle prayer over you. Father, strengthen this heart today. Teach them to walk with you even when the road is unclear. Give them the courage of Noah, the endurance of Moses, the hope of Sarah, the resilience of Joseph, and the boldness of Rahab. Let their life reflect a faith that heaven celebrates. Amen. When life feels like a waiting room, it's strange how waiting becomes one of the hardest parts of faith. Waiting for healing, waiting for clarity, waiting for provision, waiting for God's answer when everything around you feels stuck. We live in a world that hates waiting, but faith grows in waiting the way seeds grow underground, quietly, invisibly, patiently. Hebrews 11 begins with this truth. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What a powerful reminder. Just because you can't see something yet doesn't mean God isn't building it. Sometimes the waiting room is where God prepares the miracle. Abel, faith that God remembers. The first story Hebrews 11 highlights is Abel's. Not Adam, not Eve, not Noah, but Abel. a man whose life was incredibly short, a man who knew pain early, a man whose offering cost him something real. Yet the Bible says, though dead, he still speaks. How powerful is that? Your faith can outlive you. Your obedience can echo in places you'll never see. Your small, honest moments with God, they matter more than you know. Abel teaches us this. God sees what people forget. God remembers what the world overlooks. Maybe you're serving quietly, loving faithfully, giving generously, praying secretly, and you wonder if it matters. It does. Heaven writes it down. Your offering is not wasted. Enoch, faith that walks when others run. Some people run through life, chasing success, applause, security, validation, comfort. But Enoch was different. He walked a steady, daily walk with God, a rhythm of trust, a simple yes again and again. And then one day, God took him. No dramatic ending, no painful death, just a man walking with God until the line between earth and heaven disappeared. There's a hidden message here. Faith isn't measured by speed, but consistency. Showing up, praying again, reading again, hoping again, choosing God again. Enoch teaches us that a steady walk can lead to extraordinary closeness with God. Maybe you're not running. Maybe you're tired. Maybe your faith feels slow. But if you're still walking, God is proud of you. Noah, faith that builds when no one understands. Noah's life redefines courage. Imagine building a massive boat when there's no rain, no storm, no evidence, no support. People must have laughed. Maybe even friends drifted away. Maybe he questioned himself at times. But he kept building. Not because he understood the future, but because he trusted the one who saw it. Sometimes God asks you to build something that seems impossible. A stronger marriage, a new business, a dream that scares you, a new habit, a ministry, a healed heart, a better version of yourself. And people may not get it, but faith means this. I don't need everyone to understand.
I only need God to guide me.
When the rain finally fell, the ark didn't just save Noah. It proved that obedience always leads to something sacred. Your obedience is building something too, even if you can't see the storm or the ending yet. Abraham, faith that says yes when God says go. Abraham's whole story can be summed up in 2 words. He went. God said, leave your home. He went. God said, walk toward a land you haven't seen.
He went.
God said, trust me with the impossible. He went. Abraham teaches us something raw and real. Faith means moving even when the road is unclear. You don't need a map. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need all the details. You need one thing, a heart willing to follow God's voice. That kind of faith builds a legacy. And maybe God is whispering to you right now, trust me, move forward. I'm already ahead of you. Sarah, faith that rises through disappointment. Sarah's story touches a tender part of the heart. She wanted a child. She waited. She hoped. Then she grew tired. Then she laughed. Not out of joy, but out of disbelief. Yet Hebrews 11 says something beautiful, because she judged him faithful. In the end, Sarah returned to one truth. God is faithful, not time, not circumstances, not emotions, just God. And the moment her heart came back to that truth, the miracle began to move. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to return to God. Even if you laugh like Sarah, even if you doubted, even if you feel late, He still knows how to deliver the promise. Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, faith that blesses the future. These 3 men teach a different kind of faith. A faith that blesses what you cannot see. Isaac blessed his sons. Jacob blessed his grandchildren. Joseph blessed generations far beyond his own. They were looking ahead, into futures they wouldn't personally experience. And maybe God has called you to bless the future too. By praying for your children, by sowing seeds of kindness, by building something that will outlast your life, by forgiving so the next generation won't inherit your pain, By walking with God, so others learn from your example. Faith doesn't just touch today, it shapes tomorrow. Moses, faith that chooses purpose over comfort. Moses had everything: wealth, status, luxury,
Power.
but he chose something harder.
God's path.
He walked away from comfort to stand with people who were suffering.
Why?
Because faith sees beyond the temporary. Moses teaches us this. Sometimes faith means giving up something good for something God. It's not always easy, but the reward is deeper than anything the world can offer. And when Moses followed God, miracles followed Moses. The same can happen in your life. When your back is against the wall, the Red Sea moment. Picture the scene. Moses and the Israelites stand trapped. The sea in front, Pharaoh behind, fear everywhere. It looked like the end, but God turned a dead end into a doorway. The sea opened. The impossible became the path. Some of the greatest miracles appear in the tightest corners. When you feel trapped, God is often preparing a breakthrough you never imagined. Your Red Sea moment may be closer than you think. Rahab, faith that flips your story upside down. Rahab lived a life that people judged, a life they labeled, a life they dismissed. But God saw her courage. One moment of faith, opening her door to God's people, rewrote her future completely. She was rescued, restored, respected, and woven into Jesus' family line. Rahab proves this. Your past cannot stop God's purpose. Your story is not over. Your name can be redeemed. No matter where you've been, faith can lead you somewhere brand new. When faith doesn't look like victory at first. Hebrews 11 does something unexpected. After listing the victories, the miracles, the breakthroughs, the deliverances, it talks about people who suffered, people who didn't escape the trial, but still held on to God. And God calls them heroes. Because sometimes victory isn't about changing the situation. Sometimes victory is about not letting the situation change your faith. When you stand, even shaking, heaven notices. Your faith has a future. One of the most beautiful parts of Hebrews 11 is this. Their stories were incomplete without us.
Think about that.
You're the continuation. You are the next verse. You are the unfolding chapter. Your faith matters. Your trust matters. Your quiet prayers matter. Your battles matter. Your endurance matters. You are living a story heaven is writing in real time. A prayer for strength and clarity. Father, for the person listening right now, breathe courage into their heart. Remind them that their faith is seen, valued, and held in your hands. Strengthen their steps. Heal their disappointments. Lift their spirit. And turn every dark season into a testimony of your power. Amen. When God makes you wait longer than you expected. Almost every person in Hebrews 11 had one thing in common. God took longer than they thought. Noah waited decades while people laughed. Abraham waited for a promise that looked medically impossible. Sarah waited so long that she laughed at God's timing. Joseph waited in a prison cell for a dream everyone else forgot. Moses waited 40 years in the wilderness before he ever stepped into leadership. And maybe you're in that place too. You're doing everything right. You're praying. You're trying. You're trusting. But nothing looks different. If that's you, listen closely. Delay is not God's denial. It's often God's preparation. Faith doesn't grow in miracles. Faith grows in the space before the miracle. Hebrews 11 is proof that you are not failing. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. Faith when you can't see the path. The chapter begins with a simple line. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Not seen. Not understood. Not clear. Faith is not confidence in your plan. Faith is trust in his character. Think of Abraham. God told him, "Go to a place I will show you."
He didn't get a map.
He didn't get details. He didn't even get a timeline. He just started walking. You know how brave that is? To walk without seeing? To trust without knowing? Maybe right now, God is calling you into a season where you don't get full clarity. You don't get the answers you want. You don't get the reassurance you thought you needed. But you're still moving. You're still praying. You're still believing. And God sees every step you take in the dark. Faith doesn't mean you never feel afraid. One of the most comforting truths in Hebrews 11 is this. None of these people were superhumans. They were scared. They doubted. They questioned. Sometimes they laughed at God because his promises sounded too big for their lives.
Sarah did.
Abraham did. Moses did. And maybe you've done it too. You hear God's promise and something in you whispers, "Me? Really? At this age? In this situation? With my past?" But faith doesn't mean your heart never shakes. Faith means you trust even when it does. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing God above fear. Your faith is building something generations will feel. Noah didn't build an ark for 100 days. He built it for 120 years.
People laughed.
People mocked. People called him crazy. But what Noah built saved his entire family. Listen carefully. The faith you are practicing right now is preparing a blessing your family will inherit later. Your prayer life is changing your bloodline. Your obedience is shifting spiritual atmospheres in your home. Your trust in God is building something your children and grandchildren will walk through with ease. Your faith is not just for you. It's a foundation for generations. God still uses people who feel unqualified. Hebrews 11 mentions people we might not expect to see in the Faith Hall of Fame. People with mistakes. People with messy stories. People who had moments they weren't proud of. Like Rahab, a woman with a past so painful society tried to define her by it. But God said, "No, your past does not disqualify your future with me." Rahab became part of the bloodline of Jesus. When God redeems a story, he redeems it completely. Maybe you've made choices you regret. Maybe your past feels like a weight. Maybe you wonder if God can still use you the way he uses others. Hear this clearly. Your history does not cancel your destiny. If God can lift Rahab, he can lift you. If God can rewrite her story, he can rewrite yours. If God can turn her pain into purpose, he can do the same with your life.
When you don't understand the why.
Let's talk about Joseph for a moment. Sold by his brothers. Thrown into a pit. Accused of something he never did. Forgotten in prison. For years, nothing made sense. For years, his life looked like disaster instead of destiny. But Hebrews 11 includes him because of one truth. God was arranging things Joseph couldn't see. The pit was part of the path. The prison was part of the plan. The betrayal was part of the blessing. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Maybe you're in your own version of Joseph's pit. Maybe you're waiting in your own version of Joseph's prison. But God is weaving a story you can't see yet. Your why will become clear when God turns the page. Faith means you keep going even when you want to quit. Moses' story in Hebrews 11 teaches something powerful. He chose God's purpose over his own comfort. He walked away from royal life. He walked away from luxury. He walked away from people who adored him.
Why?
Because he believed God had something greater. Faith is choosing long-term purpose over short-term comfort. Faith is choosing God's voice over people's approval. Faith is choosing obedience even when it costs. And sometimes the hardest part of faith is not starting. It's continuing. Continuing after disappointment. Continuing after heartbreak. Continuing while waiting. Continuing while tired. But God strengthens those who refuse to quit. Faith doesn't always look spectacular. Some people in Hebrews 11 saw miracles. Some escaped danger. Some walked through fire. Some conquered kingdoms. But others simply endured. Others held on to faith even when life hurt. Others believed even when they didn't receive the promise in their lifetime. And God honored all of them equally.
Why?
Because in God's eyes, faith isn't measured by the size of the miracle, but by the size of the trust. Your quiet faith counts. Your small prayers count. Your tears count. Your patience counts. Your endurance counts. Your hope counts. Heaven sees the faith that nobody else sees. You are not alone in this journey. Hebrews 11 is not just a list. It's a family. A story of believers who walked through impossible seasons just like you. A reminder that the same God who parted seas, opened wombs, lifted the broken, and restored the fallen. Is the God walking beside you today? When you feel weak, He holds you. When you feel lost, He guides you. When you feel confused, He comforts you. When you feel forgotten, He remembers you. Your story is not over. Your miracle is not dead. Your faith is not wasted. The God of Hebrews 11 is the God of your life, and He still moves mountains. If you are listening right now, this part is for you. If you're tired, if you're hurting, if you feel like your faith is thin, let this chapter wrap around your heart like a blanket. You don't need perfect faith. You need persistent faith. Just enough to stand. Just enough to pray one more time. Just enough to take the next step. Because that's how breakthroughs start. Not with loud confidence, but with quiet trust. God is working in ways you can't see yet. And one day, you'll look back on this season and say, "Now I understand. God was with me all along." Hold on, Amna. Your Hebrews 11 moment is coming. When God asks you to walk before He shows you the map, one of the hardest lessons of faith is this. God rarely gives full instructions. He gives pieces. He gives hints. He gives directions step by step. Think about Abraham. God didn't tell him, "Here's the full plan.
Here's the timeline.
Here's the guarantee."
No. He simply said, "Go.
I'll show you the rest later." Imagine packing your whole life, leaving your home, facing an unknown future, with only a promise to hold on to. Abraham didn't move because the path was clear. Abraham moved because God was trustworthy. Maybe right now, God is calling you into something unclear. A decision that scares you. A dream that feels too big. A season where you can't see the full picture yet. But trust in God doesn't require clarity. It requires surrender. When God doesn't show you the road, He becomes your road. Faith begins where comfort ends. One quiet truth runs through the entire chapter of Hebrews 11. Faith always costs something. Noah lost his reputation. Abraham left his homeland. Sarah risked her heart again after years of disappointment. Joseph sacrificed comfort for character. Moses walked away from royalty to identify with slaves. Every one of them had to let go of something. A comfort, a plan, a fear, a lifestyle. And maybe that's what God is asking from you too. Not because He wants to take from you, but because He wants to give you something bigger. Sometimes God removes what is comfortable to make space for what is divine. Faith is rarely easy, but it is always worth it. When faith looks foolish to others. Let's talk about Noah for a moment. Building an ark with no sign of rain? People must have mocked him daily. Some probably whispered behind his back. Others laughed to his face. But Noah wasn't listening to people. He was listening to God. And because he trusted God when it didn't make sense, his family survived what others couldn't see coming. Maybe people around you don't understand your faith. Maybe they think you're too hopeful, too serious about God, too trusting in prayer. Maybe they don't see what you see, but that's okay. Your calling isn't for their understanding. It's for your obedience. Sometimes the most powerful faith looks foolish until the breakthrough comes. Faith that outlives your lifetime. One of the most beautiful truths in Hebrews 11 is this. Some people died in faith, not having received the promises, yet they still believed. At first, that sounds sad, but it's actually powerful because it means their faith lived longer than their bodies. Their trust reached into generations they would never meet. Their obedience built something eternal. Your faith right now, your prayers, your obedience, your trust in God is preparing blessings that your children and grandchildren will feel. You might not see the full harvest, but God will make sure your family does. Faith plants seeds that eternity grows. When you feel too weak to be used by God, many believers think Hebrews 11 is a list of perfect heroes. But when you study their lives, you realize something. They were flawed. They were afraid. They messed up. They doubted. Sarah laughed at God's promise. Moses had anger issues. Jacob was a deceiver. Gideon felt unqualified. Samson made destructive choices. Rahab carried a painful past. Yet all of them, made it into the Faith Hall of Fame.
Why?
Because God never demanded perfection. He asked for faith. Tiny faith. Shaky faith. Imperfect faith. Faith that sometimes cried, "Lord, I'm trying, help me." And maybe that's you right now. You're not perfect. You're still healing. You're still learning. You're still growing. But listen carefully. You don't need perfect faith. You need persistent faith. God can work with that. God builds miracles through that. God writes destinies through that. When life falls apart, but you still believe. Joseph's story in Hebrews 11 hits differently when you're going through something. Betrayed by his own brothers. Thrown into a pit. Sold as a slave. Falsely accused. Forgotten in prison. If anyone had the right to say, "God doesn't care about me," it was Joseph. But Joseph trusted God in the pit, and trusted him in the prison, and trusted him in the palace. Because he understood one truth. God's silence is not God's absence. Sometimes God works behind the scenes, in ways you won't understand until later. Maybe your life feels scattered right now. Maybe things didn't go the way you planned. Maybe something broke that you thought would stay forever. But God is arranging things for your good in ways you cannot yet see. One day, like Joseph, you'll look back and say, "Now I understand." God was moving in every detail. When you're standing at a wall that won't move. The Israelites walked around the walls of Jericho silently for 6 days. Nothing happened. Not a shake. Not a crack. Not a sound. But on the 7th day, the wall that once looked impossible fell flat beneath the power of God. Maybe you are walking around your own impossible wall. A financial wall. A family wall. A health wall. A mental wall. An emotional wall. And day after day, it looks the same.
Silent.
Unmoving. Unaffected. But faith is not about what you see. It's about who you trust. Just because your wall hasn't cracked yet doesn't mean God isn't working. Sometimes God tests your obedience before he releases your breakthrough. And when he moves, your wall won't just shake. It will fall flat. Faith that chooses God even when the world offers more. Moses had every luxury, royal clothes, royal education, royal respect, royal comfort, but he walked away from all of it.
Why?
Because he knew something the world didn't. The presence of God is worth more than the comfort of the world. He chose purpose over pleasure, calling over comfort, obedience over status. And God used him to change history. Sometimes God will ask you to walk away from something that looks good, so he can give you something that is eternal. Faith that refuses to let go. Hebrews 11 ends with a simple but overwhelming truth. These people held on. Through storms. Through loneliness. Through confusion. Through pain. Through silence. Through waiting. Through impossible seasons. They held on. And because they held on, God honored them in heaven and remembered their names on earth. Faith is not a moment. Faith is a lifestyle. Faith is waking up and saying, "Lord, I don't know what today holds, but I trust you with it." Faith is staying, even when you want to run. Faith is trying again, even when yesterday hurt. Faith is believing, even when nothing has changed yet. If you are listening right now, this is for you. Maybe life feels overwhelming. Maybe your prayers are slow to be answered. Maybe your heart feels worn out. Maybe you're trying to be strong, but you feel small inside. Let this message wrap around your soul gently.
God sees you. God hears you.
God remembers you. God is proud of your faith, even the small pieces of it. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. You are not invisible. The same God who carried Abraham, Noah, Sarah, Joseph, and Moses is carrying you at this very moment. And your faith, the one you think is too small, too shaky, too tired, is precious in his eyes. Your Hebrews 11 moment is coming. Your miracle is in motion. Your story is still being written by a faithful God. Hold on. Don't let go. You're closer than you think. Faith begins in the invisible. Hebrews 11 starts with one of the most mysterious, powerful statements in the Bible. Faith is the evidence of things not seen, not touched, not fully understood. We live in a world that screams, "Show me proof, then I'll believe." But God says, "Believe, and I'll show you what I can do." Faith doesn't start with your eyes. It starts with your heart. When you trust God, even though you can't see the outcome, you step into a realm where heaven begins to move. Maybe right now, your life is full of not seen moments. You don't see the answer. You don't see the direction. You don't see the healing yet. But that's exactly where faith grows. Right there in the unseen. Faith that lifts you out of your own past. One of the most surprising names in Hebrews 11 is Rahab, a woman people whispered about, a woman society judged, a woman whose past felt like a cage. But God didn't see her history. He saw her destiny. Rahab's faith saved her entire family. Her life was rewritten by one decision: to believe God more than her past. Maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you carry guilt. Maybe you've had moments you're not proud of. But hear this gently. Your past does not decide your purpose. Your faith does. If God can lift Rahab,
He can lift you.
if God can rewrite her story, He can rewrite yours too. Faith that endures silence. One of the hardest parts of faith is this: God sometimes goes quiet. Not angry, not distant, not abandoning you, just silent. Joseph experienced this silence for years. He prayed in the pit, no answer. He prayed in the prison, silence. He prayed as he waited, nothing changed. But what Joseph didn't know was that God was preparing a throne. While Joseph was sitting in chains, sometimes God is silent because He is setting up something big. Maybe right now you're praying and nothing is shifting. You're asking and nothing opens. You're knocking and the door feels locked. But silence is not rejection. Silence is preparation. When God is quiet, He is doing His deepest work. Faith for the middle days. Everyone loves the beginning of a journey. Everyone loves the breakthrough at the end. But the middle? That's where faith is tested the most. Think about Noah. He didn't build the ark in a weekend. He worked for years. Long days. Lonely days. Discouraging days. Days where nothing looked different. That's the part nobody talks about. The long middle. And maybe you're there right now. Not at the start. Not at the finish. Just in the middle. You keep doing the right things. You keep trusting. You keep praying. But the work feels heavy. Hebrews 11 tells you this. The middle is where faith becomes real. Anyone can start. Anyone can finish when the miracle is visible. But only faith holds you steady in the middle. And that's where God shapes believers into warriors. Faith that walks away from what's comfortable. Moses had a life most people would envy. He grew up in a palace. He wore royal clothes. He ate royal meals. He had influence, power, respect. Yet he walked away from all of it because something inside him whispered, "This is not who you're called to be." Faith is often uncomfortable. It pulls you out of places where you've settled. It challenges what feels safe. It asks you to trust God with what you can't control. Maybe God is nudging you right now. Maybe He's asking you to leave something behind. A habit, a fear, a relationship, a comfort zone, a mindset. Not because He wants to take from you, but because He wants to grow you. Comfort keeps you where you are. Faith takes you where you're meant to be. Faith when the battle is bigger than you. Let's talk about something raw and honest. Some struggles feel too big for you.
Too heavy.
Too painful. Too draining. And maybe you wonder, how did the people in Hebrews 11 do it? How did they stay strong? The truth is, they didn't stay strong.
God strengthened them.
David didn't defeat Goliath because he was powerful. Gideon didn't win because he had a huge army. Moses didn't part the sea because he had magical ability. Faith isn't about your strength. Faith is about His power. When you feel weak, you're not failing. You're qualifying because God shines the brightest. When you feel your weakest, faith that moves when the water hasn't split yet. Imagine standing in front of the Red Sea. Behind you, an army ready to destroy you. In front of you, an ocean blocking your way. Most people wait for the sea to split before they move forward. But Moses stepped toward the impossible before the miracle happened. Faith doesn't wait for evidence. Faith walks toward the promise, even while the water is still closed. Maybe your sea is still closed. Maybe the breakthrough hasn't shown up. Maybe the answer is still hidden. But God responds to movement. He honors steps taken toward him. Your Red Sea will open when you take the first step. Faith that survives a long wait. If there's one message Hebrews 11 repeats again and again, it's this. God rarely works fast, but he always works right. Abraham waited. Sarah waited. Joseph waited. Moses waited. Noah waited. David waited. Waiting is not a punishment. Waiting is where God builds spiritual muscle. Maybe you've been waiting for healing, waiting for a breakthrough, waiting for clarity, waiting for peace, waiting for restoration, waiting for something to finally turn around. You're not delayed. You're being prepared. Faith doesn't just wait. Faith waits with hope. Faith that chooses God even when you don't understand him. There is a moment in Abraham's story that is one of the hardest acts of faith in Scripture. God told him to place Isaac, the promised son, the miracle child, on the altar. No explanation, no details, no reason. And Abraham obeyed, even when he didn't understand. That's real faith. Faith that says, God, I don't get what you're doing, but I trust who you are. Maybe right now your life doesn't make sense. You don't understand why something happened. You don't understand why God allowed something. You don't understand why the answer is delayed. But faith rests not in explanations, but in relationship. You may not understand the moment, but you can trust the Master. Faith that refuses to break. Hebrews 11 tells stories of believers who didn't quit when they were tired, didn't give up when people doubted them, didn't run away when fear tried to choke them. They held on, not because they were strong, but because God held them together. And that's faith. Not never breaking, but letting God hold your broken pieces. Faith whispers, I'm hurting, but I'm staying. I'm tired, but I'm trusting. I'm confused, but I'm believing. Faith doesn't remove the storm. Faith anchors you in it. Your story is not over yet. If you're listening right now, maybe you're in a season that feels heavy. Maybe your faith feels thin. Maybe you're trying so hard but feel like you're not moving. Let this settle softly in your heart. God is not done. Your story hasn't reached the good part yet. Your testimony is being written in quiet places, in unseen moments, in the simple act of holding on. You don't need giant faith. You just need enough for today. Enough to pray one more time. Enough to breathe a little deeper. Enough to whisper, Lord, help me trust you again. Hebrews 11 is not a museum of perfect heroes. It's a list of ordinary people with extraordinary faith in an extraordinary God. The same God is with you,
Carrying you.
guiding you, strengthening you, preparing you, loving you, and your faith, even the tiny parts of it, is creating a future you can't see yet. Faith begins in the dark. Let's start with the truth most of us don't want to hear. Faith doesn't grow in comfort. Faith grows in darkness. Every person named in Hebrews 11 had a moment where they couldn't see what God was doing. Noah didn't see rain. Abraham didn't see the land. Sarah didn't see the child. Moses didn't see freedom. Yet they moved because they trusted God's voice more than their fear. Maybe that's where you are. You don't see the solution. You don't see the breakthrough. You don't see the promise. But faith is in sight. Faith is stepping even when sight is missing. Sometimes God removes the evidence so that trust can be born. Abraham, the faith that walks without answers. Imagine Abraham packing his bags. No map, no direction, no clarity, just a whisper from God saying, go. You and I would ask 100 questions. God, where exactly? What's the plan? What's the timeline? How long will it take? But Abraham walked because he trusted who was speaking, not where he was going. This kind of faith is uncomfortable, but it's also beautiful. Because the moment you stop depending on clarity, You start depending on God. Maybe you're in a season like Abraham right now. God is shifting things, removing people, opening doors you're unsure about, closing others that you thought were permanent. You don't see the full picture yet, but you feel a small pull in your heart telling you to keep going. That pull is faith. Sarah, the faith that laughs through pain. Sarah's story always hits deeply. A woman who waited for something her whole life, waited so long that hope started to feel painful. Some of you know that feeling too well. Waiting for healing that hasn't come. Waiting for a job you need desperately. Waiting for a prayer you whisper every night with tears on your pillow. Sarah reached a point where the promise felt impossible. She laughed, not out of joy, but out of disbelief. And God still blessed her. This is the part that melts the heart. God doesn't bless you because your faith is strong. God blesses you because His love is strong. Your doubts don't disqualify you. Your fear doesn't disqualify you. Your moments of weakness don't disqualify you. God can work with a shaking heart as long as it is still turned toward Him. Moses, the faith that walks into fire. Moses' courage wasn't natural. He was a man who once ran away, a man who felt inadequate, a man who stuttered, a man who didn't feel worthy. But Hebrews 11 says something powerful. Moses endured as seeing Him who is invisible. Moses didn't endure because he was strong. He endured because he kept his eyes on the unseen God. Sometimes the only way to survive the fire is to lock your focus on the one walking with you through it. Maybe your fire is a financial storm. Maybe it's heartbreak. Maybe it's betrayal. Maybe it's health issues that keep scaring you. Whatever your fire is, God is not asking you to be fearless. He's asking you to keep looking at Him, even with trembling eyes. Faith doesn't remove the fire. Faith gives you strength to walk through it without burning. Rahab, the faith of the outsider. This part always moves me. Rahab wasn't a religious woman. She wasn't from Israel. She wasn't a spiritual teacher. She wasn't respected. Her past was messy. Yet Hebrews 11 honors her faith.
Why?
Because faith is not earned. Faith is offered. God sees hearts, not histories. You may have a past. You may have mistakes that still sting. You may feel unworthy at times. But God doesn't write people off. He writes people in. Rahab believed God could save her even when everything around her said destruction was coming. And that's faith. Believing God will do for you what the world says is impossible. Walking through fire. Your story. Let's bring this chapter into your life now. There's a fire you're walking through. It may not look like flames, but it burns. It wears you out. It keeps you awake some nights. But Hebrews 11 teaches something deep. Faith doesn't mean you won't have trials. Faith means the trial won't have you. Think about it. Noah survived the flood. Abraham survived the journey. Sarah survived the waiting. Moses survived the enemy. Rahab survived destruction. Not because they were strong, but because God was faithful. If God carried them, God will carry you too. Faith that fights back. Sometimes faith feels like a soft word, gentle, calm, peaceful. But there's another side of faith. Faith can be fierce. Faith says, I know the doctor's report, but I'm still believing. I know my bank account is empty, but I'm trusting God to provide. I know this heartbreak hurts, but I believe God is healing me. I know nothing is changing yet, but God hasn't forgotten me. Faith is a fight. A quiet fight. A steady fight. A stubborn fight. And that's the kind of faith Hebrews 11 builds inside you. When you don't feel strong enough. Let me say something gently. You don't have to be a hero. Some days you will feel weak. Some days you will feel tired.
Some days you will cry.
Some days you will want to quit. But the beauty of Hebrews 11 is this. God doesn't need perfect strength. He needs a willing heart. It's okay if you're shaking. It's okay if you're unsure. It's okay if you're tired. Just don't let go. Faith isn't loud. Sometimes it's just whispering, God, I trust you. Even when your voice cracks. God is working behind the scenes. Every person in Hebrews 11 waited. Some waited years. Some waited decades. Some died waiting. But all of them saw God's faithfulness in ways they never expected. Right now, God is doing things you cannot see. He is moving hearts, aligning opportunities, removing obstacles, preparing breakthroughs, healing wounds, opening doors, strengthening your spirit. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean God is silent. Silence is often the sound of God working deeply. You are not alone. Let's end with something simple but powerful. Hebrews 11 wasn't written for perfect people. It was written for people like you. People who feel the weight of life, who feel fear, who feel overwhelmed, but who still want to believe. Faith doesn't demand perfection. Faith just asks you to keep holding God's hand, even through the fire, even through the unknown, even through the silence, even through the tears. And when you walk through that fire, you'll come out stronger, wiser, and closer to God than you've ever been, just like they did. Faith that begins in the heart. Hebrews 11 opens with a simple definition. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is invisible. Faith is quiet. Faith is small. Faith is often ignored by the world. But faith is powerful. It's the unseen engine behind every answered prayer. It's what propelled Noah to build an ark when it had never rained. It's what made Abraham leave home with only a promise. It's what gave Joseph strength in a prison cell. Faith begins in the heart before it shows in the world. Even a tiny amount of faith, a mustard seed, can change your life forever. Faith when the world says impossible. Hebrews 11 is full of stories where faith collided with impossibility. Sarah laughed at God's promise of a child in her old age. Abraham risked everything for a land he had never seen. Moses walked away from a life of comfort to face an entire nation in bondage. These stories teach us that faith doesn't depend on logic. Faith depends on trust.
Trust in a God who sees what we cannot see.
Trust in a God whose timing is perfect. Trust in a God whose power is greater than our circumstances. When the world says impossible, faith whispers, God is still able. Faith that stands in the waiting. One of the most challenging parts of Hebrews 11 is the waiting. Waiting is hard. Waiting feels like nothing is happening. Waiting can make us doubt ourselves, God, and the future. But look closely. Every hero in Hebrews 11 waited. Noah waited years for the flood. Abraham waited decades for Isaac. Joseph waited in a pit and in prison. Moses waited 40 years before leading the Israelites. Waiting is not punishment. It is preparation. Faith is not passive. Faith persists in the waiting. The person who trusts God through delay will experience his timing as perfect. Faith that overcomes fear.
Fear is a natural response.
Fear whispers, you can't do this. You'll fail. Or it's too late. Yet, Hebrews 11 shows us that faith moves despite fear. Rahab, a woman with a difficult past, hid God's spies and believed he could save her. Gideon, who thought he was too weak, led an army to victory. David faced Goliath, though he was small and young. Faith doesn't erase fear. Faith acknowledges fear but chooses to trust God anyway. You can feel afraid, yet still step forward in faith. Faith that changes generations. Hebrews 11 reminds us that faith doesn't just affect us, it touches generations. Abraham's faith didn't just bring a promise to him, it shaped nations. Joseph's faith preserved a people. Noah's faith saved his family. Your faith matters more than you think. Your prayers, your trust, your persistence, they influence your children, your family, and even people you may never meet. Faith is an investment that bears eternal fruit. Even small acts of faith, praying for someone, obeying God quietly, giving when it's hard, can create ripples that last for generations. Faith that embraces God's timing. Faith is not about rushing God. It's not about demanding answers. It's about trusting God's perfect timing. Hebrews 11 is full of people who waited longer than they expected. Sarah waited for a child. Abraham waited for the land. Moses waited to lead Israel. Waiting is part of faith. Faith trusts that God is never late. Faith knows that God's timing is always better than our own. When you feel impatience creeping in, remember, God's plan is always unfolding, even when you cannot see it. Faith that walks in obedience. Faith is active. Faith obeys, even when it doesn't fully understand. Abraham went where God told him. Noah built the ark. Moses confronted Pharaoh. Rahab protected the spies. Faith requires action. It's not enough to believe in your heart. You must walk in alignment with God's word. Obedience amplifies faith. Action turns belief into reality. Even a small step of obedience can bring great results.